Noah's three sons. The record we have of the sons of Noah are in Genesis, the 10th chapter, when we talking about the descendants of Noah. And this is the origin of the human race. This is it. A lot of people try to compartmentalize and just make everything just exactly like they want to believe, but mankind has been on this earth for quite a while. A little bit more than 6,000 years, as some of the chronology say. Mankind was created in the garden. He was created outside the garden, put in the garden. That is the origin of the human race. Adam and Eve were the mother and father of the whole human race. I have been in a lot of nations, and I know you have too, Sharon. You've been all over. You lived in Egypt and in the Middle East. And I've been all over that area. And one of the oldest places in the world where human habitation is, do you remember when you were going over there? Do you remember when you went by Mount Carmel? Did you go there?
Well, we went by, one of the buses are there.
And they showed caves up there where mankind had been for thousands and thousands of years. This is one of the oldest recorded habitation of the human race. And it's a long time ago. A little more than 6,000 years ago. Now, mankind is created in space and time. Here, if you look at the chart. And it was created in innocence. In eternity past, we have the creation of the heavens and the earth, and we have also before they were created, angels and spirits were created, and some of the angels followed God, and some of them disposed themselves of God, so to speak, and they followed Lucifer. That's in eternity past, and the earth was created in eternity past. We have a young earth generation, and that would be all right if that was what the Bible taught. But the Bible teaches that God created the heavens and the earth in eternity past. It says, Ba'ashith bara Elohim et hashemayim ve'et ha'aretz. It says, in one of the beginnings, in a beginning, plural, he had created God, the heavens and the earth. And then it says there, we ha'aretz hathiatuhu avohu. We hoshkapel panei hamayim. We ruah Elohim meripachet el padei hamayim. And it said, and the earth became formless and void, and spirit God mourned over the faces of the deep and of the waters. And then God began to reconstruct the earth at that time. There was a pre-Adamic earth, and there's a post-Adamic earth. So many people try to say, well, this is it. This man's only been on the earth 6,000 years. Now, up where I live in Nevada, I took Maryland there, and maybe we'll take you up there one day. I don't know. Have you ever been to the ancient Brusca Pine up there, Sharon?
Once, but not that museum you told me.
Oh, okay. Not the museum. But anyway, it's a museum up there now. And it goes back, and if you look on the website, you'll see the road trip to the top of the world. You can go on there, and you can listen to the lectures there in that museum where they can trace these trees back thousands and thousands BC. Many thousand years BC, before Christ. Thousands and thousands. And it goes back into eternity. Way back in eternity. There's trees there that were old when Adam was created. Old when Adam was created. There are trees there that had been dead for 2,000 years when God created Adam. And the earth was in existence a long time ago. But a lot of people say the young earth, the earth is only 6,000 years old, etc., etc. That doesn't pan out, people. I mean, it would be, if the Bible taught that, I'd believe it. But the Bible doesn't teach that. Now, with the races of mankind, there's only one woman and one man, and they weren't Neanderthals, they're not Cro-Magnon, they were not any of these people. Usually the people that they call Cro-Magnon or, the Clovis man or whatever, we find out they're not an evolution of humankind. You can take Africa, the American Indian, the Asian people, New Zealand, Australia, the Solomon Islands, New Guinea, and all of these people, and you look at them and they've got similar traits. And we know that the Hamite people, the languages were confused more. In the 10th chapter of the book of Genesis, we have the origin of all the races. All three. Negroid, Caucasoid, and Mongoloid are Ham, Shem, and Japheth. In the 11th chapter of the book of Genesis, we have over here, we have the creation of man, and over here, we have the fall of man, and then we have conscience of mankind, do good and offer blood sacrifice, and the wickedness, and then we have the universal flood, and then over here, we have human government established, and then we have a lot of failures already so far with mankind, and then we have the division of the earth. The earth is divided, and the languages are confused. And we know that the Hamites were thrown out further away than the Shemites or the Anglo-Saxon, the Caucasian people, the Caucasoid. Okay? They spread all over the world. Now, if you go to the Middle East and you go on an archaeological tour like I did, I didn't go on a regular tour. I went on an archaeological tour. I got 4 units of ancient history by going to the Middle East in my college classes. And I went to many towns. One of the oldest cities in the world is Hebron and Damascus, and I spent a lot of time at both of them. I know you wouldn't want to go to Damascus, Syria at all today, but I spent a week there. I think 9 days, actually, I spent at Damascus. And studying the places there. They have a place where they said the Garden of Eden was. The oldest church in existence, as far as they know. That church structure, part of it, is still there, where Paul was baptized and became a member of that church, and they sent him back to Jerusalem. And meanwhile, he went to Arabia for a while, too, for about 3 years, and was taught by Jesus Christ himself. We see all of this. You go up there to Hebron, you go to Jericho, and you go to Jericho, and you saw that the walls fell down straight. The ground just swallowed them up. They fell down intact, and they dug them up, and there they are still. They just fell down in the ground. The towers are still there from the ancient city of Jericho, etc. By the way, the Bible is a real good tour guide for archaeologists. It is. But if you go up to Mount Carmel now, if you've been to all these other places, you've been through Jericho, probably the oldest inhabited city, continuously inhabited area in the world. And you come over here to America, and you start studying about American Indians, these people, the Mormons say, the Jews, the lost tribes that came over to America on a submarine with a hole in the top thereof and a hole in the bottom thereof, which couldn't work anyway, but that's Joseph Smith. Anyway, they were here already. The Indians were already here. The Indians were here when God divided the earth. They were already here. They didn't have to come over on land bridges. There were horses here, by the way. All kinds of things that people... The Smithsonian Institute for years suppressed any information about ancient American Indian culture being here and advanced cultures. The Hamite races invented almost everything that's ever been invented. All of the basic inventions. The Japhethites perfected them and took over the Hamite cultures wherever they went also. In the 9th chapter of the book of Genesis, it said that the Hamites would be slaves, and some people believe that the slaves means that they would be contributors, servants of all the other people, the Shemites and the Japhethites, because they would develop all the different nations in the world. They would invent irrigation. They would invent printing. They would invent warfare. They would invent gunpowder. They would invent all the ancient. They would learn how to make cast iron stoves. They would pipe natural gas into homes. And this happened before Christ. This is a long time ago. Most people don't understand that. In America, when the Columbus came here and the Spanish Inquisition came here, basically, they were gigantic cities in South America and Mesoamerica and even in North America, gigantic cities. When they came to the East Coast, they said the whole coast was lit up with lights after dark. They were great cities there. They were great orchards. And then, of course, in the 1800s, they're going to teach the Indians how to plant and become farmers. What a joke. The American Indian people genetically produced food that has fed the world. The world was starving to death on milk and cheese and butter and barley and wheat. That's all it had. A few fruits and things like the oranges, whatever. But the American Indian developed peppers, tomatoes, potatoes, corn, etc. The list goes on and on and on. And I've read it in the first lesson. This is lesson number 2 of Noah's 3 sons. The American Indians here, there were gigantic cultures in South America and Mesoamerica. The North American Indians lived under a democracy. The South American Indians and the Mesoamerican Indians were very much like the Egyptians. They had an emperor god, so to speak. And of course, in Meso and South America, they had human sacrifice in the Mayan temples, etc. Many human sacrifices, like they did among the Hamites in Palestine and neighboring areas there. The Egyptian culture and the Meso and South American cultures were very similar. You can take a globe and pull it apart and put the continents back together. They fit together. The world was Pangea or Gondwana, all earth one place and all water at one place. But in the days of Peleg, God divided the earth and also confused the languages. That's a fact. That's not debatable. The earth, the scientists call the earth, and this what they call the Continental Drift theory, that is biblical. That's the Bible says, in the days of Peleg, God divided the earth. Simple as that. Now, America, missionaries all over America want to go down into South America and get these uncontacted tribes and them that live out there like primitive man. They're very primitive Stone Age cultures. Except when they find a piece of metal and whatever, they make use of it. Even parts of airplanes, etc. But how did they get there? How were they always that way? Were they always primitive? No. N-O. No. Euthymia. Not at all. They weren't that way. They were part of those gigantic, extremely advanced cultures down there. And when the Spanish came here, when they went in and conquering the cities, when they took over those gigantic cities, there were post offices. They had a postal service and roads running for thousands of miles. And this goes back even before Christ. Some of them. Back when the earth was divided. They lived in a communist system down there in those countries. The Spanish went down there and they saw cities that they could not believe. You could eat off of the streets. Europe, there was filth and feces and garbage in the streets all over. Europeans didn't take baths. The Indians said you could smell a European for a mile when they come. The culture, the medicines, 70% of our medicines today come from American Indian tribes, North, Meso, and South America. 70% of all the pharmaceuticals were developed from plants and things that the Indians were using already. There was advanced medical science and surgery, etc., in Egypt, Meso, South America, especially. It was there always. We see the people there, they were developing medicine, they were developing treatment, they were doing fillings and teeth, etc. They were operating on people's brains. They were relieving tumors, etc. They have skeletons and fossils from these people back then. And the oldest mummies in the world are where?
That's not Egypt.
They're not in Egypt. They're in South America.
South America?
That's right. The oldest mummies in the world are there. The pyramids of Mesoamerica and South America are as ancient as the pyramids of Egypt. These are the same people. Now I'm teaching from a book called Noah's Three Sons by Arthur C. Customs. There are 10 volumes of this. I'm trying to concentrate from the other volumes down into this one also. They talk about Neanderthal man, the Mongolian type of mankind, etc. You can take different tribes and their heads are shaped, their skeletons, their skulls, and these archaeological finds. The people look very different, and yet they are similar in DNA. Now we have DNA. Since this book was written, we have DNA. Why, Sharon, you know where you came from. You were 1/9 Indian, aren't you? American Indian.
Something like
About 1/9. Marilyn thought she was full-blood or half Danish, and she found out she probably was not over 1/8 Danish. She's German. She's a 1/4 Greek. DNA tells a lot of stories. You go back up into the White Mountains and you study those bristlecone pines. The bristlecone pines restructured and corrected what they call this carbon dating. They know exactly when Mount Vesuvius blew up from the bristlecone pines. They know exactly when that happened. They know the ice ages and they know the mini ice ages in Europe. As a matter of fact, the American Indians, they a lot of Indians today are not very, they think they know their own culture. They don't. I wrote a book called An Introduction to the Thoughts and Customs of the American Indian, Volume 1 and 2. And it was to bring the Indians back to their culture and to understand where they came from. And not only that, but this culture evolved from Christianity from Noah's day. That's where it came from. The basic truths among all cultures. There was a universal flood. There was the earth was divided, etc., etc., etc. This happened. The Eskimos are extremely closely related to the Navajo Indians. They are the same family. We talk about the Anasazi, the ancient ones in the Grand Canyon area, all through there. And what happened to them? Well, my friend Walt West was down there with Marathon Oil Company, with George Bush Sr. group, and they uncovered a virus called hantavirus. And out of 50 people on that work crew, 38 of them died within 2 weeks from this virus. That's, they say, probably is what killed the Anasazi. And it has spread all over America from the Four Corners area. You won't hear that in the news, especially the Big Five, or anybody else. You're not going to hear that. I heard that from Walt West's own mouth, which is the head of that expedition there. And he died from the results of that Hantavirus. Years later, he retired early. But they covered it up because Marathon would be extremely liable for all the deaths that happened, because they disturbed this area that brought this virus back into play, and it was passed through the deer mice. But those people completely they left away. They were gone. There are all kinds of legends how they left, how demons came and killed them. They became cannibals, that there were Nephilim among them, which there might have been Nephilim. But probably it was a hantavirus that killed them. At least that's what the group that studied that said, that were part of Mensa. They went into a study of that in Mensa, and they stayed in there a week studying all the evidence, and they said, this is probably what happened. There's a lot of things that took place that the average man does not know. I was only privy to that because I knew Walt West. He was a lifetime friend. He's buried here in Bakersfield. There was a Paleolithic melting pot from the tip of South America all the way to North America and into what we call the Eskimos, from the Aleutian Islands, etc. The American Indian and the Hamitic races, even the black races in Africa, Nigeria, etc. An African continent is a gigantic continent. You can go in there and you can see people from 7 foot tall, 7.5 foot tall, down to pygmies. You'd always tell a pygmy for why. How can you always tell a pygmy, a real pygmy? Does anybody know how you tell a real pygmy? They take and they chip their teeth off to where they're like sharp points. A pygmy will always have his teeth sharped off like knife points, like nails. They chip them off like nails. Very powerful people. You can look on YouTube and see some of the different cultures there, but look and see if they got sharp teeth. If they got sharp teeth, they're really pygmies. If they don't, they don't. The basic stock of all mankind, when I did my DNA, it goes right back basically to the Garden of Eden. It goes from one source. And it spreads all over the world. Mine, the biggest amount of my DNA is in Meso and North America, and that's the way it is. If I had the chart here, I could show it to you, and you could see the chart that I have. Around the whole top is American Indian, and then Arabian, and then goes down a little bit to little bitty things, different kinds of Indians, and I'm 1/32 Scots, and a tiny bit Italian and a tiny bit French. But that is the way the races are. If you think you're a full-blood German, just do your DNA. You might not be. I found out you're more than half Russian or Polish or whatever. The Australian races of people there in Australia and New Zealand and the islands, they are very inventive. They can live off of nothing. But now you just take that. That's pretty rough. That's a pretty rough environment down there. But how about taking an Asian, because American Indians are Asian, but you take one and put him in Alaska. That's an unforgiving environment. Unforgiving environment. Do you know that the Eskimos invented the telephone?
Invented what?
The telephone.
The Eskimos?
And the Eskimos invented the telephone. How did they do that?
You mean telephone?
Yeah, well, they took very thin bones and baleen, whatever, and they tied a string from one igloo to the other, and they would talk into that string, and the guy would hear them on the other end. Now, we did that when we were kids. You took a tin can, you tied a string in it, and you could talk. Well, that's what they were doing way back then. And that was, you know, they didn't want to run from igloo to igloo because it might be 50 below zero. And they learned how to use whale oil, etc., all of that, without any white man teaching them how to do it, by the way. They learned how to dehydrate. Why, the South American people up there in the Andes, they learned how to have instant potatoes. You think that some of these countries invented instant potatoes? Well, Maryland likes to use instant potatoes. I think you do too, Sharon. You take the potatoes, you put this potato mash all dried up in hot water, and you stir it around, and it becomes mashed potatoes. Well, that was invented by American Indians. You go all the way back to this. Even the American Indian, the Eskimo, the Australian races, the Maori jaw is held to be Eskimo in type, and yet it covers. American Indians and blacks have stronger teeth than any other race of people. While Northern Europe and the European people had small teeth. Small teeth. Why, black people and American Indians, they've got even 3 and 4 roots on some of their teeth, where the Anglo-Saxons, they only have 2. But it's not a different species. It's not a different species. It's the same structure with all the Hamitic people. One of my family, they were Chickahominy and Chickasaw. It goes all the way back to the Corley family, and married into the Paul family. One of them became a doctor, a dentist. And when she was going to dental school and doing different things, they typed her as American Indian because she had American Indian, what they call structure of her teeth. She did not know she was Indian. You know, Indians tried to be non-Indian for a long time. My family, they wouldn't tell you they're Indian. My grandmother and great-grandfather and all of them, they didn't want to tell you they were Indians at all. Because Indians were very, very mistreated and were diminutive in society. Well, she found out she was American Indian, and she got a hold of me, and she said, "Are we Indian?" And I said, "Yes." I didn't find that out. My family never told us that at all, and it went back to the Corley and Pauls and the Lamberts, and also to the Arbuckles. Fatty Arbuckle. What we could call, he was one of the greatest singers of all time, and a silent movie actor. And Fuzzy St. John, that was his nephew. Fatty Arbuckle and my step-great-grandfather were first cousins. My great-grandfather was Roscoe Russell. Fatty Arbuckle was Roscoe Arbuckle. They shared the same name. Their mothers were sisters. And then Fuzzy St. John was their nephew. These were all part Indian. They were all Indian. Chickahominy and Chickasaw. You go back and you study these people and you study these races, and they have characteristics that go through all of their evolution, and I don't mean evolution like an evolutionist, but the evolution of the societies and where they lived. The hierarchy of the king gods, like from Egypt, was shared in Meso or Central and South America, with the Mayan culture, etc. The Hamite people were driven. They were driven into the far, what we might call, the farthest regions of the earth. South America, North America, Mesoamerica, the Polynesian Islands, the South Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, etc., etc., etc. China. The Chinese were Hamites. And the Chinese invented paper. They invented the first printing presses, by the way. They invented the first printed money. The Japhethites followed them wherever they went. And they took over their cultures, and basically they made them not speak their language anymore. That's what happened in North America and South America. They forbid them to speak their language. When the Muslims went into Egypt, they forbid them to speak ancient Egyptian at all, and that's one of the reasons why we lost the code to the hieroglyphics of Egypt. It's because of the Muslim world. The Muslim world did a whole lot like the Anglo-Saxon Caucasian world did into South America, Central America, North America, and in New Zealand and Australia and Canada. The cultures were taken over. They used their resources. America. When America was discovered by the English on the East Coast and by the Spanish on the West Coast, they found advanced cultures. Advanced cultures. Tremendously advanced cities. In North America, all the way from what we might call the Midwest, or even Idaho and Wyoming, etc., all the way from there to the East Coast, the Great Plains were created. They didn't happen that way. The American Indians, when the first white people came here, they said they were always setting the place on fire. They burned so much brush and trees in America that they created a mini ice age in Europe from all of the pollution in the air from the smoke. So the American Indians did contribute to pollution back 1,000 years ago, okay? 1,500, 2,000 years ago, they were over here burning everything up. They created the Great Plains. There was mesquite brush, etc., all the way where there is now Great Plains, and they created this great range for their great herds, the buffalo, the American bison. And they drove those bisons all the way back as far on these Great Plains that were created all the way back to New York. And in New York and all the New England states were great farms and plantations when the white man came here. There were great farms and there were great orchards here of nut trees and everything. And there were highways that went all the way from there, all the way up here to Mono Lake, not far from where I live up there. And Mono Lake was a trade center where the Indians would come together and trade. And they would bring things from the East Coast, and that's where you find this money and different things you find scattered all over the place. They don't understand these different artifacts that were 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 miles from where they originated because they had trade routes, just like they did in South America. When disease took over South America and Mesoamerica, the Indians that were advanced cultures went into the far reaches of the Amazon. And by the way, even the Amazon, there was areas there that were completely cleared out, and some of the Amazon forest that we have today was created after it became wild again. When Lewis and Clark went down on their great expedition from one coast to the other, America had already reclaimed itself back in some of those places because so many Indians had died that they couldn't keep it all burned off and cleaned up. The Indians used to set the woods on fire every fall. You know that the giant sequoias cannot even repopulate or reproduce unless they have a fire? What's this story all about on Noah's three sons? The story is that God created mankind. And that Noah's prophecy in the 9th chapter of the book of Genesis was going to come true no matter what. Shem, Ham, and Japheth's future were set in stone, so to speak. Thousands of years before the people even knew what they were doing. That was before the division of the continents, before the division of the earth, etc. This was before all of that. God said what was going to happen. The Hamite culture would make contributions to the whole world, to Shem and Japheth, that were unbelievable amount of information. The lands that would be opened up by the Hamites would come in, and the Shemites and the Japhethites especially would go in and build cultures on their foundations. And we see that all over the world. Noah's three sons are real. Noah was a real person. The flood was real. It really happened. But you have to realize the flood at one time was only half of the earth. Only half of the earth was flooded because the other half of the earth was already flooded. You think about that? Why, there's probably 2/3 of the earth is water. Only 1/3 of the earth is mass. It is epitase gas. It is land mass. Or haaretz. It is the land, the dry land. When the flood came, the waters went over the tallest mountains, over 20 some odd feet deep. That really happened. If you don't believe in the universal flood, just get on top of a 747 jet and fly from one end of the United States to the other. You can look down there and you can see how the water ran. If you don't believe that the earth was destroyed at one time before Adam was put on it, just drive up Highway 395. Is that right, Marilyn?
Yeah.
All the volcanic cultures and all of that. And the earths that were created, the Sierras, the Rockies, the White Mountains, and all of this. They're created from the earth, twisting and rocking and pushing up. And a lot of these places are still creating. They say the mountains go up and down with the earth breathing. The land out here goes up and down with the earth breathing. Because really, all of the crust of the earth is just so thick, all the rest of it is magma, solid magma underneath, molten rock underneath. This is true. This is all real. Noah cursed Canaan. The people that were cursed, really cursed, were the Canaanites. And Israel would go in and take their land that they had developed there. Because God knew that the Canaanites would become so wicked and so diseased that they needed to be annihilated, because those diseases would spread all over the world. And one of them was, well, some of them were what we might call sexually transmitted diseases, venereal diseases. Tremendous. The animals were even infected with it. That's why God told them to go in and to wipe out all of these cultures. Now, in every culture there were people that believed. Did you know that? And some of these people that believed, that came out of these other cultures, became part of the Messianic lineage, didn't they? Remember Rahab the harlot, Ruth the Moabitess, etc.? These people are in the lineage of Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ is the Savior of all men. We've made it as far as page 151 in our little book tour of Noah's three sons. In all of this, God did create mankind in his image. He didn't create a monkey and monkey evolved into a man. There are some people that are very hairy, and some people are almost bald in genetics. But mankind did not come from an ape. though an ape is very much mankind, man-like. Animals all have souls. We know that from the Hebrew language. They have nephesh. Animals and mankind are triune, but mankind was created in the image of God. And God decided in eternity past that He wrote our names in the Lamb's Book of Life. That's what you call predestination, isn't it? Or foreknowledge, at least. And God said that He was going to send His Son, that God would become flesh in the person of Jesus Christ. The name Jehovah means He who shall become. All the way back in the book of Genesis, in the 2nd and 3rd chapters, we have the name Jehovah beginning there. And we find out that Jehovah is going to take upon the sin of the whole world upon Himself, and He's going to redeem the whole world. For God so loved the world, He didn't just say mankind, He said the world, that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. God sent His Son into the world not to destroy it at that time, but to save it. The second time Jesus comes, He's going to rapture His people, and then at the end of the tribulation period, He's going to appear in glory, and He's going to wipe out all the bad people on the earth and the unbelievers. He's going to put Israel back on the throne in Jerusalem for 1,000 years. And then at the end of that 1,000 years, He's going to come back and just literally reconstruct the whole earth again. It's going to melt with fervent fire. He's going to cleanse it, and there will be not one foot track of sin left on the whole universe at that time. Amen? And we got some good things to look forward to. And we're living in some uncertain times right now, but we got some good things to look forward to, don't we? The rapture. Maybe some of these things are moving toward that time. And if you don't believe in the rapture, you ought to anyway. Let's put it that way. John MacArthur said that. If you don't believe in the rapture, don't believe in the millennium, you ought to. Father, we send this message out to honor and glorify You in every way. Please forgive us where we fail You. And help this message to touch people's hearts all over the world and give them better understanding of Your word and Your will and Your foreknowledge and Your providence and Your sovereignty. In Jesus' name we pray.